Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Soul Focused Radio. This is your host, Martin Friedman, and I'm really excited to have the opportunity to have Anuar Velázquez back having another conversation. Anwar, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, Martin. I'm doing well. How about yourself?
I'm doing really well. You know, obviously a lot going on in the world, as it just seems to be every day, right? And
Absolutely.
at Soul Focus Group, we acknowledge that and we keep it moving, towards our goals of healing from racism, you know. So I really wanted to check in with you. I reached out to you last night. Yesterday was the verdict in the Derek Chauvin case. So knowing that people could be hearing this at very different times, today is the 21st of April. Yesterday was the verdict that came down and guilty on all three counts. One of my first thoughts was wanting to get some reaction from you. And I just want to start, with just a very, straightforward question. And, how do you feel? Like, how are you feeling today about all of this?
Yeah, no, I get you. So first, let me say thank you for reaching out and checking in to see how I was doing from both angles. Being a man of color, and then the other one, my police and my prior experience as a police officer. Overall, I think I would say that I just had just a bunch of different mixed emotions. Happy, excited that some justice was done, but the more I looked at the deeper rooted issue, I thought, well, how as a society have we become so excited about this issue when we publicly in live, right? We witnessed this in live, this murder. And now that we have the decision that I'm sure by and large everyone in this country wanted, everyone in the world wanted, that we have set the standards really low to think about, well, this should have been a decision made day one or day two, not 300 and some days later. And obviously, I know that there has to be a process in the system and due process and all of that. But we all really were waiting for that decision on a very traumatic event for that long. So think of the overall injury, the collective injury that must have caused for a lot of people internally and externally too.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I definitely want to explore that more. And, one of the things that I felt pretty quickly, definitely a sense of, I wouldn't say, I know people were happy, they were jubilant. I didn't necessarily feel that. I think I felt more relief because I knew that a not guilty verdict in any of them would, it would be a mess. People would be in the streets and it was going to be a mess. And that's what I didn't want, more people to be hurt. I think I feel really similar to you. I think you really nailed it. And just to let people know, you and I haven't talked about this. This is our first conversation about it. So I think you really nailed how I felt, which is, I felt like, why are we jubilant about something that was so cut and dry? Like, why did it take something that was so cut and dry to actually get a verdict that probably should have been brought in other cases that we know about in the country? So
Mm-hmm.
I think I was very much aligned with what you were feeling. Is like it seems so obvious, that you had police officer after police officer testify that he didn't follow protocol. Yeah, that's just what I was thinking. I was just thinking, this seemed, like the party that was an officer for 10 years, like, when you watch that video and you heard the testimony, what did you think from that perspective? What did you feel from that perspective?
From the testimony overall, from the testimonies.
You're from the testimony and just watching an officer do this, watching a white officer do this to a black man and knowing what you know about policing and, everything that went into you wanting to be a police officer, being a police officer, how did that feel to you, just all of it together, watching the video as well as listening to the different testimony from officers saying that this should never have happened?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think overall, to watch that going on, because I've had different conversations with other police officers about it, and at times what triggered me would be to hear some officers justify, well, we don't know, we weren't there, talk about the level of maybe adrenaline that officer was experiencing at the time. But when I saw myself, I'm thinking out loud. I didn't see any adrenaline once he's put in his knee for that amount of time. You
Right.
know, to hear the testimony of officers, really talk about that's not how we do things. It's true. That's not how we're supposed to do things. At that moment when that officer was doing it, I try to put my mind in that officer's position, but I can never come to that. I really couldn't. I could never justify it. I could never say, maybe he was going through this, maybe he was going through that. No, that's complete negligence. Not only on that person, but also on the duty, on the oath that he took as a police officer when he wanted to work for that city. The mantra that's on the side of that police vehicle is to protect and serve. At that point, both of those words were completely removed from his job and from his duties as a police officer. There was no protection happening. There was no serving anybody. His whatever traumas or whatever experiences that officer was living through, they showed that anger, that the dislike or the overall feeling toward that human being kicked in, and they took over control of who he is as a person. And that may show too of who he is overall as a person as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then, just thinking about, knowing you a little bit now and having had these conversations with you, and, you always bring it back to why you wanted to be a police officer, and
Mm-hmm.
how it was always to be, it was always to protect and serve, and to, see somebody abusing their power. I mean, literally, it was like literal power over. It was physical power over. It wasn't, and it was also institutional power over too, because he had the institution on his side, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
the other officers weren't jumping in, and they were keeping the bystanders away. And, there's just something that's so, I know for me, felt so wrong. And, I can only imagine how you felt watching it. And then given that, you know, just exploring even more how you felt with the verdict.
Yeah, and I like how you bring up the institutional power, because when I think about all those other officers, I think about myself as a police officer and how disempowered I was as a police officer by the institution, right? To fall in that mindset of the thin blue line,
Mm.
which was such an ugly way for me to just give up who I was as a whole, right? My whole full authentic self, in a way, had to be put aside so I could fit into these norms, to these values that fall in the thin blue line mindset. Because if those officers that really didn't do much, or that really contributed to it, if they were to remove themselves from the uniform, would they have intervened in somebody doing that to another human being, right? But when the uniform gets put on, your humanity is taken at the same time. You're almost acting like a robot in a way. You're having to go through the motions instead of really going through the emotions, right? Through the actual human emotions of things.
So there's literally like a dehumanizing process that everybody that puts on that uniform goes through. So even Derek Chauvin, as much as, there's so much hate and anger towards him, I hear you saying, certainly not that he's a victim, and yet he also went through that dehumanizing process. And then have you seen, because as you were talking, I'm like, well, I know you've seen this because I know where you've worked, but do you see officers almost falling in love with that though? Do officers almost fall in love with that, the aspects of that power over? And even though they might be feeling dehumanized on some level, it almost plays out as like a doubling or tripling down on that aspect of it, like literally falling in love with that power.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're talking about giving a person power to either take somebody's liberty away or take somebody's life away in a matter of seconds. The split decision, right? So that's a lot of responsibility on any human being to have. And with all the traumas that you experience as a police officer, that dehumanization process starts right there. The other day, I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who I worked with as a police officer about some of the stuff that we've witnessed and we've experienced. And I brought up a specific call that we went to, and his point was that none of what we saw affected him as a human being. So I bring up a specific call, and I'm like, bro, like nobody should be witnessing the things that we witnessed. And at the same time, we weren't getting the help that we needed to be able to work through some of those things. I mean, there were times that we would go from homicides to domestic violence calls in a matter of minutes, or you witness a couple of homicides throughout the day, and you still have to work and go to other calls without really much help on how to metabolize what you just saw or what you just observed. So how does this compile? How does this really pile up internally that is creating the external forces of power and control? How does that contribute to it? And it's something that we need to start analyzing. It's something that we need to start figuring out. Well, how do we also help empower in the sense, again, power within, right? How do we help empower those officers that are in those systems to really take more of a peace officer mindset, more of a peace officer overall view of the job? Because I've heard police officers talk about, they'll have stickers of the Punisher or stickers of, like, a hero like that on their vehicle, or on their laptop, or on their background page for their phone, or whatever it is. They have those things. And it's like, what kind of mindset are you bringing into the table when you think about a Punisher? Who are you here to punish? Mm. That the courts are the ones that really drop the punishment. Mm-hmm. The only thing that police officers do is we deliver criminals and we deliver suspects to the courts. We're not punishing anybody. So I could never understand that mindset that some officers will take. And they take it very deeply. I mean, they almost give up their identity to become part of this, again, this police, like you saw the creation of the thin blue line flag and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. The movement of all those identity pieces that fall in place with being a police officer.
Anwar, can you tell us a little bit about that call that you just went back over with him? You don't have to go into details or anything, but just tell us a little bit about that call that you just went over with, your friend who said that they, didn't suffer trauma. Can you just tell us a little bit about what you all experienced?
Yeah. So we were working. So I worked night shift in an area that was we dealt more with violent crime, stabbings, homicides, shootings, violent domestic calls and stuff like that. But there's one specific night we responded to this area on the railroad track, and the engine conductor called in and said, "Hey, I think I just hit somebody in the train, right, on the railroad tracks." So you obviously get a lot of police officers respond to this because it's a large area. So we all have to walk the railroad tracks to look for possible somebody, either an animal or an actual person being hit. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we found a person who laid on the railroad track and their head was decapitated, severed. And here we are standing here looking at this, in real life, seeing this person that just decided to do this. I think it was determined to be a suicide overall. And we found also a piece of paper where this homeless person was the person that died. It was a person experiencing homelessness. They had just been released from jail. So in my head, I'm thinking about a bunch of other things. I'm thinking, well, now I have to really metabolize what I just saw. But I'm also taking into consideration, like, what really drove this person to that extent to really get to this point? Did the system fail this person? Were they not given enough opportunities? So then they ultimately decided to commit this act here. Mm-hmm. But I mean, so can you think about if I'm telling you this and you're not living it real life in that moment? Think about the person that actually saw it and witnessed it, and for them to say, "No, this didn't affect me," or "I don't remember it like how you do." And it's like, think about the process in our mind that we have to really do, or we have to put in place to make sure that we're putting up a barrier so what we just saw, what we just witnessed, doesn't come back and affect us later in the future. That's so unhealthy.
Right. And there was really nothing in place. There was like nothing really in place for you all to, like, go through like trauma therapy or anything that really recognized the fact that every time you were on a call, anything like that at all, and didn't even have to be that extreme, right? But there is a level of PTSD that you would go through. And was anything done, to address that?
No, I mean, officers were just all around this person, jokes are being made, all that stuff, because we think that's the healthy way to deal with it, to talk about it in a joking way. That's our way of thinking, I'm dealing with this. In the time that I was a police officer, close to 10 years, witnessing, like I said, anything from child neglect, child abuse, sexual abuse, homicides, anything and everything that you can think of. There was not one time when I really had that opportunity. Actually, let me say, I did have an opportunity to take on that, but again, the institutionalized system or that institutionalized mindset was really more. It hovered more of me actually taking the decision to really get some help. You know, I worked an arson case where unfortunately some people died inside of this burning home, and I was one of the first responding officers helping out firefighters. You know, firefighters are in the house yelling for help, so you know it was pretty bad if firefighters are screaming for help for their coworkers or for their
Right.
partners. So we get done with that. Again, this was early in the night. We still have 4 or 5 hours to continue to do other duties, other work, other calls. The next day, the officers that responded to it are brought into this conference room and kind of like in a circle. And the supervisor was like, "Hey, I just want to check in. Do you need help?" And he starts with the officer that had the most experience, you know, the veteran officer. Well, the veteran officer says, "No, I'm good. I don't need any help." Then they move on to the next officer. Again, it was kind of like by experience. We were sit by how many years we've been in the department. So if the officers that have been on the department for the longer time, are saying no, they don't need any help, well, how is that going to make the newer officers feel by the time they got to those officers? So ultimately, nobody said, "Yeah, I think I would like to talk to somebody about it," or "I think I would." No, because you know we look at each other and we're like, "Hey, so and so said they don't need any help. So and so said they don't need any help." It puts me in a position where, well, what if I do need help, or what would happen, or what would be the image that would be placed upon me if I do were to seek help for some of this stuff.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you for sharing that because I think that that's a powerful glimpse into because we'll hear that I was interested to hear what you would say because I know we've heard that that type of trauma therapy or trauma response is offered to officers that go through those kind of situations. So I've known you to be a very empathetic person, and I've also heard you talk a little bit about struggling sometimes to keep your empathy while you were an officer. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like, how did you maintain empathy through all of these numbing experiences, all of this PTSD that wasn't treated? How did you maintain empathy, and when did you feel like sometimes you would lose your empathy and you would lose possibly seeing the humanity in the people that you were dealing with?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, you know, my first years as a police officer, like I said, I worked in an area that we were dealing with constant violent crimes. So at some point, you start to question humanity and people overall. You start to question, well, I'm here and my intention is good, and I'm driving forward. I'm patrolling these neighborhoods. I'm wanting to get to know the people that live in these neighborhoods. I'm wanting to create a connection, an overall connection. But I'm not seeing much change. I'm
Mm.
not seeing much benefit to all the stuff that I'm doing. So what's missing? So then you start to question: is it me, or is it actually the people that I'm working with? Is it the people that I'm here to protect and serve? You know, I shouldn't be seeing. I would ask myself, man, why did this young young mom did this to their newborn? Right? You start to question that person as an individual and their intention and their humanity, instead of actually stepping back and thinking, well, what drove this young mom to do this? What
Mhm.
caused it? What is going on through this young mom's life that caused this action? Right? So I think for me, it was after seeing it so much, I started to get that compassion fatigue. I started to have that lack of empathy. I had to reel myself back in and think about, well, life is not black and white. You know, life, the law and the scripture and the writing in those books may be black and white, but
Mhm.
life is not. So that's when for me I had to step back and think, well, everybody's life is going to be a lot different than mine. Those experiences are going to be differently than mine. So I felt that I would be a better police officer by willing to walk along a person's narrative, to be able to capture everything and make a decision based on everything that I was getting. Obviously, as a police officer, you're going to get some cases that are very defined, right? Some calls that are very definite. This is what the decision that we need to make.
Right.
But I think That's another thing as a police officer is you're disempowered to really create that mindset or to create that decision based on everything. It's almost like, no, here, this is what you need to do. You have the handcuffs and you place the handcuffs on this, and that. Instead of thinking, well, what if me placing the handcuffs on that person is not going to help them? I may see them again and the day after that and the day after that. Am I changing behaviors here or am I just contributing to the issue? So that's really what it took for me is really sitting back down and really taking a deep breath and thinking about, well, how am I a contributor to these issues?
Yeah, I think that's so powerful because we talk all the time about the need to see ourselves in other people. Like it's when we don't see ourselves in other people, when we start to believe we would never do the things that they do. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
that's when this horrible violence can happen, right? Because I think myself and like a lot of other people, when I watched the video of Derek Chauvin, kneeling on George Floyd's neck for, I guess it's now they're saying it's even longer than 8 minutes and 46 seconds, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
where is the empathy? He's calling for his mother. He's in handcuffs. He's calling for his mother at that point. Like, clearly, for you to do that, you cannot see yourself in this other human being. And that's why I think people called it a lynching because, it's the same thing that we see in pictures of lynchings. Like, we see people not seeing the human being that's being, tortured and hung and the most horrific things done to them, can't see their humanity, can't see ourselves in them. And it sounds like that for you, the challenge was to maintain that level. And it also sounds like from what I'm hearing you say now and from our previous conversations, that there's almost like a culture of not seeing yourself in people, in the people that you're interacting with on the street. And would you say that's true?
To an extent, yeah, yeah. I mean, overall, when I look at a lot of these cases, where I look at a lot of these police videos that come out, I really think about, well, was that officer really looking at that person's humanity? Was that
Mm-hmm.
fully taken into consideration, or were you acting on your implicit? Were you acting on your subconscious so much that you let it take over you as a person overall? When I have these trainings or when we have these conversations with police officers, I challenge them to think about, well, would you do that if you were not in uniform? Would you act in that manner that you acted if you were not in uniform? Because if you wouldn't, then you're fully allowing that uniform and that badge to take over who you are as a person and as a human being.
Right.
There's a lot of times you hear officers talk about, well, we want to be seen as people too. And I fully see that. And I at times I would deal with that myself. But then I question those officers on, are you seeing other people as fully people, or are you seeing them as a call? Are you seeing them as I just have to deal with you on this incident? And are you treating them as an incident instead of as a person?
Mm-hmm. And I think you and I both know that's a systemic setup too, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a
Absolutely.
systemic setup that the history of policing really is about not seeing the humanity and really dividing people out that would naturally be together. So it's that divide, that external divide of people. And then it's also the internal divide. You can't honor your own humanity if you're not honoring somebody else's and vice versa. So it really feels like the system asked for it. And I think that's really the question I was asking is, did it feel like the system would almost reward you, like punish you for seeing yourself in the people that you interacted with and reward you if you didn't? I think that's the real question I was trying to ask.
Yeah. And again, that's a tough one, but I would say to an extent, absolutely, because they talk so much about officer discretion,
Mm-hmm.
and you have as an officer you have the discretion to make a decision based on what you believe is best.
Mm-hmm.
But then at times I would get overridden by either a supervisor or overall how every officer was looking at that call, and you want to be like, well, if I steer this way, if I make this decision, how are these officers going to view me now? What's going to change? What mindset am I going to change for these officers if they see me make a different decision than what they would make? So yeah, like I said, to an extent, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, I think I mean to me that's such a powerful point because a lot of the answers like When people even just saying defund the police, or just a lot of what people say are the answers, it really feels like what the answer is to figure out a way to reward officers seeing the humanity in the people that they're interacting with. That if that was actually the culture, that it really is going to take a cultural shift, no matter how much, whether you have 50% of the police force or 25% of the police force or whatever. And, I wanted to say something because you brought up a couple times, like, would you do that if you were out of uniform? And I think another question is, you know, what if you saw somebody, if you saw an officer doing that to somebody that you knew or that you cared about, what would you do? Would you stand by, or would you do everything in your power to stop that person from doing the same thing you're doing to somebody else? If you were an observer of an officer doing that to somebody that you knew and loved and cared about, because
Mm-hmm.
the people we love and care about, we see their humanity in them. But if we're not walking, from a place of love and care for everybody, then it's a setup, and also, racially too, like, seeing more value in white people. And I think a lot of people are just sitting with the fact that the white people that just killed a whole bunch of people, get walked away in handcuffs. And, black people that stole cigarettes or tried to pass a bad $20 bill are dead, you know,
Mm-hmm.
just really thinking about that as well.
Yeah, and that's where, like I said, I think the institution itself plays a huge role on the disconnect in the humanity, or the disconnect in overall working with the community.
Right.
Because I've had the opportunity to work for two police departments that function completely differently. One of them deals more with higher income population. The other one was the area that I worked was lower socioeconomic status.
Mm-hmm.
And the things, the resources, the way we police were completely different. And it's on, again, how we've been socialized to look at people experiencing poverty, how we have become so disconnected from people experiencing poverty, and we act as if they're not people overall. They're more just a collectiveness of that person's life and decision making, right? We automatically go to that. Well, why did they get to that point? Maybe they didn't want to work. Maybe they didn't want to do this, and now they have to be out here selling drugs. Instead of thinking the bigger picture of, like, why was their system, or how was our system set up to be put in place and created for these disadvantages to be created, right? And as police officers, again, we're disconnected to that. We just come in and we're asked to do the job without fully taking into consideration everything.
Mm-hmm.
That piece of, we have got to start seeing our own family members in the people that we're dealing with as police officers. Maybe that may stop us from making the wrong decision overall. You look at those officers in Buffalo that pushed that during that riot, during the protest, and they pushed. I think he was like 75 years old.
Yeah. Yeah.
He was not armed. He was not a threat. They're walking by. He's walking the opposite direction. So those officers decide to push him. I mean, I would never. I could tell you, I would never push my grandfather or any older person or anyone in that position.
That's right.
So how disconnected do you have to be from humanity for that decision to be made? Now let's think about those officers that witnessed that. They're disempowered themselves because they won't speak up. They won't say anything about it. They
Mm-hmm.
continue to march along.
Mm-hmm.
Because we do know that as a society or as an institution, the officers that have stepped in, where do they end up? There was a case recently of a black female officer that intervened during a use of force incident.
Mm-hmm.
She was fired. She was let go. Luckily, now the judge actually pulled their decision back, and they're allowing this person or this officer to get their pension and other things. But look where that ended up. All because she felt the power within to speak up and to call something out. But look where it got her. So that institutional disempowerment is huge.
Yeah, it really is. I'm just right now, I'm thinking about so much. And one of the things I'm thinking about is, you know, how training could be shifted, almost like you could almost create like a training exercise where, you would evaluate how you would respond to somebody that did something and then do the exact same training exercise, but insert a family member or a friend,
Mm-hmm.
right? And this idea that our family members and friends can't do the same thing, like you said, it's just not taking into consideration all of the factors. One of the things I'm really holding a lot right now is, Dustin talks about all the time. When him and I talk about you, he always says, you're the exact person that should be a police officer still. And I'm really feeling that in this conversation because there's a realness and a vulnerability to you simultaneously. You're real about the challenges, but there's also like a vulnerability about, the challenges in terms of seeing humanity in people. But there's also a vulnerability, that in a connection to your feelings and you know, the fact that you at a certain point had to make an adjustment and say, you know, I need to start to view the humanity in the people and not just default that I would never do this thing that this person just did. You know, you are the person that should still be an officer.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I think that the system is so screwed up because I know from talking to you that you'd like to still be an officer, but you just couldn't maintain anymore in the systemic environment because it didn't reward your type of policing. It rewarded, the other type of policing that leads to Derek Chauvin's, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And overall, I would like to say, and I would like to think that by and large, the intentionality behind a lot of police officers in our nation is a good one. It
Hmm.
is the right one. But I feel like those officers really need to start digging in deep and think about, well, how have I been socialized? How have I been institutionalized to think that I don't have the power to really drive the community forward? And those institutions really need to start, like you said, rewarding those officers for doing such good things. Because I know there's plenty of officers out there doing good things for the community. I know there's plenty of officers out there doing good things for the community overall. But how do they feel disempowered? How do they feel about coming in authentically to the job? Because again, that intentionality may be all good and all, or may be good and all, right?
Hmm.
But are they being authentic themselves when they step in that police vehicle? Are they being authentic themselves when they put that uniform on?
Hmm.
Because if they're not showing up authentically, that intentionality is thrown to the side, and the institution kicks in. That institutional mindset kicks in.
Hmm. And that's what I understand. That's essentially why you just couldn't be an officer anymore. Is that accurate?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and
Absolutely.
that's why we have to really, we have to counter this narrative that it's just quote unquote just a few bad apples, right? Because it's the system rewards that behavior, and that's so problematic. That's so much why we have the problems that we have right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The last thing I want to say, we'll close out in a minute here, is early on in this podcast, you said that you thought pretty much everyone in the world was, expecting and wanting this outcome. And, as you said it, it's kind of hit me a little bit because I know at least in this country, there's probably close to half, right? Just thinking about
Mm-hmm.
our divide around politics and people seeing this as a political issue and systemic racism as a political issue. That I'm just thinking about all the people that think it wasn't the right decision. And I just wonder if you've thought about them at all. And, if you maybe know some people that you were an officer with that probably are not celebrating this today, but are thinking that it was a travesty of justice.
Yeah, I mean, I have no doubts that there are probably people that feel like the justice wasn't served. They wanted the justice on the other side. I absolutely have no doubts that there's that. But I think, as you know, the more focus or the more work that we do around spirituality and being spirit, like bringing our spirit to the full table, is the more I focus on people like that, the less I'm focusing on the collective good that we can really work with. And I know, like I said, this was a global issue. You know, for those who think that this was just a United States issue or a Minneapolis issue, no, this was a global issue. I had friends and family members from Mexico calling and asking about it. You know, but I think overall, I like to focus on the ones on those that are here to really push the needle forward to the right direction overall.
Well, thank you for that, and thank you for sharing this time with us. On a day where I know, as you said at the very beginning, you're feeling a lot of conflicting emotions. I see you as a healer. I see you as someone that has the potential to do a lot of healing work moving forward as you train other officers around, reconnecting with their humanity, reconnecting with their empathy. As you become a school counselor and work with young people, I just see you as, I'm honored to know you and to be able to, have you as someone I could reach out to today. And I really see you as someone moving forward that is going to help some of the healing, help, be a facilitator of healing and, really maybe being able to, influence the universe and the world in a way that this start happening a lot less.
Thank you, Martin. I appreciate that, and I appreciate the time you've given me to come in and just have this powerful conversation with you. I'm a big believer in purpose, and we all have a purpose. I knew this was mine for a long time, but I'm glad I found it with you all, and I appreciate you being a good friend of mine again.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. All right. Well, thank you again. And thank you everybody for listening. We hope that you're dealing with whatever conflicting emotions you're having around this and that you see the humanity. You continue to work on your ability to see the humanity in everybody, even as we focus on how other folks can't see humanity. I know every day it's a practice for me to make sure I'm seeing humanity in everybody I come across, because it's so easy to fall into that pattern of not seeing that humanity in everybody. And there's no shortcut. It's everybody. So we thank you for listening. We thank you for being on the journey with us. We remind you to check out our website. Lots of new and exciting things will be happening on our website really soon, and are now. We have all kinds of offerings now, like online offerings. So please go to soulfocusedgroup.com. Check us out on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And know that we love you. We care about you. We want you to stay safe, stay well, and most of all, stay soul focused.
If you wish to support and represent the Soul Focus Group, check out our apparel store at our website, www.soulfocusedgroup.com/shop.